Chapter 17 of Tractate Shabbos is largely a continuation of a lot of the principles from the latter half of Chapter 3 on the laws of Muktzeh, or not touching objects which aren't used on or set aside for Shabbos. The first Mishnah states that all utensils with doors, such as trunks, carriages, or cabinets, may be moved on Shabbos along with their door, even if it became detached. Excluded are house doors, which, if detached, may not be moved on Shabbos, as they weren't prepared for Shabbos use. Some specific items and their permissible uses: a hammer to crack nuts, a hatchet to cut a cake of pressed figs, a saw to slice cheese, a shovel to scoop dried figs, a winnowing shovel or pitchfork to pass food to a child, a spindle or weaver's reed to spear fruit, a hand needle to remove a splinter, and a larger needle for sewing sacks or to pick a door lock. The Gemara argues if the cabinet doors case was where they were detached on a weekday or on Shabbos. It also discusses regular doors and the prohibition of reattaching them to their hinges, not because of the malachos of building or demolishing, but because you might fasten them insecurely, which would be the malacha of striking the final blow. Further, in regard to the hammers for nuts, some say that's only with a nut hammer, as they hold that something typically used for a work forbidden on Shabbos cannot be used even for something permissible. Others disagree, as we said you can use a pitchfork for feeding a child. So, they would hold that you could use something forbidden on Shabbos for its typical use for something else. Others disagree, but they agree that some specific items which people are particular about and are designated in specific storage may not be moved on Shabbos, such as spindles, clothes presses, and mallets. There are further opinions as to which hammer you can use. There are further points on the remaining utensils allowed. Some allow straightening out the limbs of a baby, others don't, as unlike removing a splinter with a hand needle, the limbs are actually attached to the body, so relocating them is akin to repairing a vessel and not allowed. New Mishnah: a cane used for turning olives in their vats. If there's a knot at the end, it's susceptible to impurity, otherwise it's not. Either way, it can be taken out on Shabbos. The Gemara says the reason why is because the knot forms a cavity which fills with oil. New Mishnah: some say all utensils can be taken on Shabbos except large saws and a coulter. The Gemara says that some include a launderer's riddle due to its similarity to a coulter. Some also say a tanner's knife, a butcher's knife, and a carpenter's adze. These are explained further and some additional points and on tubes. There are further points also on certain parameters, such as if the hollow of a doorway is considered inside a house, and similar. New Mishnah: all utensils may be taken either out of necessity or not. Some say only with necessity. The Gemara clarifies, when it says out of necessity, some say that means to make room, some say that means out of the sun into shade. There are sources and similar cases. This is discussed further along with the point on skylights. Among others, it also discusses moving pillows out of the sun. There's also an argument if you can move brooms of palm as opposed to of cloth, which people allow in order to get into the shade. New Mishnah: any utensil which can be used on Shabbos, you can also use its fragments, as long as they can be used for a task. For instance, fragments of a mixing bowl or fragments of glass to cover the mouth of a flask. Some say it's only allowed if the fragments have a semblance of their former use. For instance, the bowl fragments can have porridge poured into them and the glass fragments oil poured inside. The Gemara says that some say this argument applies if the vessel broke before Shabbos, but if it was during Shabbos, all permit its use. Others disagree, saying the inverse. The argument is if it broke on Shabbos, and it's permitted if it broke before, because it's prepared for a new task before Shabbos started. There are some sources, and it says regarding leftover bricks from a construction site, you can move them as they're technically usable on Shabbos, as you can recline on them, but if they were stacked, they've been set aside for construction and can't be used. It also says a point about a sage using a shard to scrape mud off the shoes of another in a public domain, as it would be permissible to use in the courtyard. It also says that the lid of a shattered cask can be moved on Shabbos. It says somewhere, if you throw it out, it's now forbidden. This is explained to apply if it was done before Shabbos started. It also says that reed pieces that detach from a mat can be moved, as they can be used to cover dirt, similar to the mat itself. Patches of a talus that are smaller than 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths cannot be touched on Shabbos, as those are unusable even for a popper for patches. There's an argument in this regard about shards of an old oven and how it relates to impurity if it's attached to the ground. This is explained to the shards are usable by baking on them, as is done with tiles, but some say that's not considered similar to the original use of the oven, which some require, and others do not. for it to be able to be touched on Shabbos. The difference being the tiles are heated on the outside versus the oven, which is heated on the inside. We hold an oven cover does not need a handle to be moved on Shabbos. New Mishnah. Gourd shells used to be used as well buckets, with a stone inside as weight. You can draw water using the shell on Shabbos if the stone is securely attached, meaning it won't fall out while drawing water. Otherwise, no. A vine tied to a pitcher you can use to draw water with on Shabbos. Regarding a window shutter, some only allow it to be shuttered if it's tied to the window with a short rope, so it won't look like you're building by adding to the structure. Others allow it even without this. The Gemara says regarding a stone left on a cask, you can tilt the cask to have the stone fall off, if it was left there unintentionally. If it was intentional, some say you have to leave it there, others say it's now classified as the cover of the flask and may be moved. This is not comparable to our case with the gourd and stone, because there it's secured tightly. The argument by the intentionally left stone on the cask is based on if you hold you need a significant action of preparation to designate something as a utensil. The one that says not allows just placing it to make it a utensil, the other disagrees. There's a similar case where somebody holds that a minor act can designate a stone as a utensil, thereby wiping them clean. Some say it was with beams or with the sounding pole of a ship, which its owner is particular about and is set aside from use, so requires a greater leniency than the other to allow. There's discussion on the vine tied to a jug, and some require it to be tied to the jug before Shabbos, so people don't start cutting down vines on Shabbos. The argument by a shutter is if you can make a temporary addition to a structure on Shabbos and holidays, although you definitely can't make the temporary structure itself. There's discussion on shutters and comparison to a door bolt. This is discussed further. New Mishnah. All vessel covers with handles can be taken on Shabbos. Some say that this applies to covers of holes in the ground, and vessel covers don't require handles. The Gemara says, some say this applies only if the covers can function as utensils. It also says the argument about utensil covers with handles or not applies to utensil covers that were attached to the ground. They agree with the other points. Some say it's over the cover of an oven, whether it's considered a ground cover or a utensil cover. And that's the end of chapter 17.